My name is Harper, and for years I let my family believe I was exactly what they said I was. A disappointment, a desk worker, someone who chose the safe path while others took the real risks. They had a narrative about me, a story they told themselves and everyone who would listen, and I never corrected it. Not once. Not because I couldn't, but because I understood something fundamental about human nature that they never grasped. People who have already decided who you are won't change their minds because you tell them they're wrong. They'll only change their minds when reality forces them to. And reality doesn't negotiate. It doesn't argue. It simply reveals. What happened at my sister's engagement party wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't plan it. I didn't orchestrate it. I simply continued doing what I'd always done, my job, and circumstances aligned in a way that made concealment impossible. But that's the thing about the truth. It doesn't need you to fight for it. It just needs an opportunity to surface. And when it does, when it finally breaks through all the lies and assumptions and comfortable narratives people have constructed, there's nothing more devastating, nothing more complete, nothing more satisfying. This is the story of how my family learned who I really was, not because I told them, but because the truth refused to stay buried any longer. This is the story of what happens when you underestimate someone based on your own limited perception, when you build your identity on being superior to someone you never actually understood, and when the consequences of your own arrogance finally catch up to you in a room full of people whose respect you spent your entire career chasing. The room didn't have windows. It never did. That was the point. I sat under cold fluorescent lights inside the Pentagon, staring at a classified file that didn't officially exist. Lines of encrypted data scrolled across my screen, each one tied to a decision that could get someone killed or keep them alive. The soft hum of secured systems filled the silence, that constant electronic pulse that most people stop noticing after a while, but I never did. I processed it like I processed everything else, as information, as pattern, as something that might matter later even when it seemed irrelevant now. My workspace was deliberately anonymous. No personal photographs, no decorations, nothing that might identify who I was outside this room. That wasn't protocol. That was preference. The fewer connections between this identity and the one my family knew, the cleaner everything stayed. The easier it was to compartmentalize. Most people couldn't understand that kind of separation, living two lives so completely that one never leaked into the other. But for me, it had become automatic, natural, necessary. I leaned back slightly in my chair, eyes still locked on the screen, replaying a satellite feed in my head while cross-checking coordinates. Something didn't line up. It rarely did on the first pass. Intelligence work isn't about seeing things clearly. It's about seeing things accurately through layers of noise, misdirection, and intentional obfuscation. The truth is always there, but it's rarely obvious. You have to dig for it. You have to want it badly enough to push through everything designed to hide it. My phone buzzed. Not my secure line, the one that never left the facility and could only be accessed through protocols that would take most people weeks to understand. My personal phone. The one connected to my other life, the life where I was just Harper, the disappointing daughter, the silent sister, the family member who showed up to events and stood in corners and never had anything impressive to say about her career. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Arthur, my father. Colonel Arthur Reeves, a man who had spent 30 years building a reputation on the backs of other people's work and calling it leadership. He never called to check on me. He called when he needed something. When there was a role to fill, a task to assign, an expectation to enforce. Our relationship had been reduced to a series of obligations I never agreed to but somehow still owed. I let the phone buzz once more before picking it up. A single message. Don't be late tonight. This actually matters. I stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary, processing the layers of insult embedded in those 6 words. Don't be late, as if I had ever been late to anything in my life. Punctuality was one of the few things Arthur respected, and even that respect was grudging when it came from me. This actually matters. As if the other events I'd attended, the other gatherings I'd shown up for, the other moments I'd stood silently in corners while being ignored or dismissed, hadn't mattered at all. Of course it mattered. Chloe was getting promoted again. My sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one whose every accomplishment was celebrated and whose every failure was quietly erased from the family narrative. She was moving up again, climbing ranks, collecting accolades, building the kind of visible career that Arthur understood and respected. The kind that came with medals and ceremonies and photographs for the mantelpiece. I locked the phone without replying and turned back to my monitor. There was no point in responding. Arthur didn't want a conversation. He wanted compliance. He wanted me to show up, fill space, and stay quiet while the real family members were celebrated. That was my role. That had always been my role, even when I was a child, even before I understood why I was being placed in that position. A few more clicks, a few more adjustments. I flagged an anomaly for follow-up, something in the signal patterns that didn't match expected behavior. It was subtle, probably nothing, but I'd learned early in my career that subtlety was where the real threats hid. The obvious dangers were easy to spot. It was the quiet ones, the patient ones, the ones that moved in patterns so slight they almost didn't register, that killed you. I pushed the file into the next stage of review. Somewhere across the world, that decision would ripple through people who would never know my name. That was the job. That was always the job. Making decisions that affected lives without ever being able to explain those decisions to the people involved. Without ever being able to take credit for the saves or accept responsibility for the losses in any public way. The work existed in shadows, and the shadows were where it had to stay. I shut down my station, grabbed my coat, and stepped out into a hallway that looked exactly like every other hallway in the building. Clean, controlled, anonymous. The architects who designed these spaces understood something important about the people who worked here. They didn't need inspiration. They needed efficiency. They needed environments that didn't distract from the work, that didn't demand attention or emotional engagement. The building itself was designed to support compartmentalization, to make it easier to leave the work behind when you walked out the door. But the work never really left. That was the part they didn't tell you when you started. The things you saw, the decisions you made, the weight of responsibility you carried, it all came with you. It sat in the back of your mind during dinner, during conversations, during the quiet moments when you were trying to sleep. It changed you. It had to change you. And anyone who claimed otherwise was either lying or hadn't been doing the work long enough to notice. By the time I reached the parking lot, I had already switched roles from someone who handled classified intelligence to someone who apparently did nothing at all. The transition had become seamless over the years, almost automatic. I could feel the shift happening, the mental compartmentalization that allowed me to move between worlds without bleeding one into the other. It wasn't healthy. I knew that. Any therapist would have told me it wasn't sustainable. But it worked, and in my line of work, working was all that mattered. The restaurant was loud before I even walked in. I could hear it through the walls, the particular quality of noise that came from too many important people trying too hard to impress each other. Private room, high-end, military crowd. You could tell by the posture alone. Even in civilian clothes, these people carried themselves like they were still in formation, like at any moment someone might call them to attention and they'd need to be ready. I stepped inside and immediately spotted my father at the center of it all. Arthur stood like he owned the room, one hand on a glass of whiskey, the other gesturing as he spoke to a group of officers hanging on to every word. He had that particular quality that some men develop after decades of authority. The absolute certainty that everything he said was worth hearing, that every story he told was worth telling, that every moment he commanded was inherently valuable. And right beside him, Chloe, perfect uniform, perfect posture, perfect timing. She laughed at something someone said just enough to seem humble, not enough to break the image. Her medals caught the light every time she moved, those small metallic reflections that drew the eye and reinforced the narrative. Golden child, fully polished. The daughter who had fulfilled every expectation, who had become everything Arthur wanted, who represented the best of what he believed himself to be. I adjusted my sleeve and walked in quietly. No one noticed. That was normal. I had long ago stopped expecting to be acknowledged when I entered a room where my family was present. The dynamic was too established, too reinforced over too many years. I was the afterthought, the obligatory inclusion, the one who had to be invited because excluding me would have raised questions, but who was never actually wanted once I arrived. I found an empty seat near the side of the table and sat down without interrupting anything. A server passed by and I picked up a glass of water, holding it loosely in my fingers while I settled into the familiar rhythm of being present but invisible. Arthur didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Ignoring me had become second nature, so practiced that it probably wasn't even conscious anymore. I was simply part of the background, the furniture, the expected scenery that required no attention. Middle East deployment, 6 months straight, Arthur was saying, his voice carrying across the table with practiced ease. You don't come back from that the same person. A few nods from the assembled officers. Someone leaned forward, the posture of someone about to ask a question or offer praise. And those scars, Arthur added, pointing lightly toward Chloe's arm. Earned every single one. Chloe gave a modest smile, lowering her gaze like she hadn't heard that speech 100 times already. Like the acknowledgement was fresh and surprising and not the entire point of the evening. I took a sip of water. Same script, different audience. These performances had become so routine I could predict them with near-perfect accuracy. The stories would be told. The accomplishments would be listed. The medals would be admired. And somewhere in the middle of it all, there would be a moment when I was mentioned, usually dismissively, always as a contrast to the real achievements being celebrated. One of the guests, a colonel I didn't recognize, turned slightly, his attention drifting across the table until it landed on me. Ah, he said casually, you have another daughter, right? There it was, the question I'd been waiting for, the one that came at every single one of these events without fail. Someone always noticed, someone always asked, and Arthur always answered the same way. Arthur followed the colonel's gaze. For a brief second, his eyes met mine. No warmth, no recognition, just acknowledgement that I existed and that my existence had now become an inconvenience he had to address. Then he smiled, not at me, at the colonel, the smile of a man about to deliver a punchline that he'd perfected over years of repetition. Oh, her, he said with a small chuckle. She's not like Chloe. I kept my expression neutral. The muscles in my face had been trained to stay still through much worse than this. Through briefings that detailed catastrophic failures. Through intelligence reports that described things no human being should have to read. A dismissive comment from my father barely registered on the scale of emotional disturbance I'd learned to manage. The table leaned in just a little. This was the entertainment portion of the evening, the contrast between the accomplished daughter and the other one. The one who hadn't quite measured up. The one who served as proof that even in successful families, there was always a disappointment. Arthur took a sip of his drink, enjoying the moment more than he should have. He always enjoyed these moments. The opportunity to establish hierarchy, to reinforce Chloe's superiority by comparison, to publicly position himself as the discerning father who recognized quality when he saw it. She's just a desk worker, he continued. Types on a keyboard, organizes logistics files, paperwork stuff. A few polite laughs from people who understood they were expected to find this amusing. Useless job, honestly, especially in peacetime. The word useless landed exactly the way he intended it to. It settled into the space between us, into the space between me and everyone else at that table. It was a label, a definition, a judgment delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had never been questioned and never expected to be. I tightened my grip around my glass, just slightly. Not enough for anyone to notice, except maybe someone who knew what to look for. Someone trained to read the subtle signs of controlled emotion, of pressure being held in check. But no one at this table was looking for that. They were too busy being entertained by my father's performance. I kept my eyes on the table. No reaction, no correction, because I couldn't correct him. I couldn't say that 3 months ago I was the one rerouting a drone strike that cleared a path out of an ambush. I couldn't say that Chloe's unit would have been wiped out without that call. I couldn't say that while he was bragging about her scars, I was the reason she lived long enough to get them. The conversation moved on quickly, like it always did. Chloe picked it up smoothly, shifting the attention back to her deployment. Stories, controlled details, enough to impress, not enough to cross any lines. She was good at that. She'd always been good at that, at presenting exactly the right version of herself for any given audience. It was a skill I'd observed my entire life, one I'd never mastered and never wanted to. Arthur laughed louder than anyone else at the table. I sat there listening to a version of reality that left me out completely. Not just left me out, erased me. Rewrote history to exclude any contribution I might have made, any significance I might have had. This was the narrative they had constructed, the one they told themselves and everyone else, and nothing I could say would change it. A server refilled glasses, silverware clinked. Someone made a joke about supply chains, and the table responded like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. I took another sip of water. Cold, steady, predictable. The only things in the room that weren't trying to be something they weren't. Across the table, Chloe's eyes flicked toward me for a split second. Just enough to confirm what I already knew. She saw me. She just didn't care. Or worse, she enjoyed this. Enjoyed the comparison that always favored her. Enjoyed the public reinforcement of a hierarchy she had always benefited from. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting the noise of the room pass over me. Invisible wasn't new. It was efficient. It kept things simple. And it allowed me to observe, to gather information, to understand dynamics that the people at the center of the attention never saw. That was the advantage of being overlooked. You saw things. You heard things. You learned things about people that they would never have revealed if they thought you were paying attention. Arthur raised his glass again. To real service, he said. The table echoed it. To real service. Glasses clinked. I didn't lift mine. I just sat there, listening to the sound, the hollow ritual of people congratulating themselves for things they only partially understood. And for a moment, I let myself think about how strange it was that the people who talk the most about honor usually had no idea what it actually looked like. Honor wasn't in the speeches. It wasn't in the medals or the ceremonies or the careful performances of humility. It was in the quiet decisions made in rooms without windows. It was in the refusal to take credit because credit wasn't the point. It was in the understanding that some work was more important than recognition, that some contributions couldn't be acknowledged, that some forms of service required absolute invisibility. But that wasn't something I could explain to people like Arthur and Chloe. They wouldn't have understood even if I'd tried. Their entire concept of worth was built on visibility, on being seen, on the external validation that came from audiences and applause and public acknowledgement. The idea that something could matter without being recognized, that someone could be essential without being celebrated, was completely foreign to them. I set my glass down quietly. No one noticed, not even when I stopped listening. Not even when I retreated entirely into my own mind and let the evening continue around me like weather passing through. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't make any calls. I just drove through the dark streets, processing the evening the way I processed everything else, as data, as pattern, as something to be understood and filed away. The dinner had been worse than usual somehow, more pointed, more deliberate in its cruelty. Or maybe I was just noticing it more, becoming less willing to accept the version of reality they kept trying to force on me. My apartment was small and anonymous, much like my workspace. Nothing personal on the walls, no photographs, no mementos, just the essentials, the things I needed to function. I'd never seen the point in building a life that reflected who I was when who I was kept changing depending on which room I was standing in. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about the strange disconnect between my two lives. In one, I was a ghost, a shadow, someone so unimportant that my own father felt comfortable dismissing me to rooms full of strangers. In the other, I was the person they called when things went wrong, when systems failed, when the only path forward was invisible to everyone else. Both versions were true. Both versions were me. And somehow I had to keep them separate, keep functioning, keep doing the work that needed to be done regardless of how it was perceived or whether it was acknowledged. That was the job. That had always been the job. Sleep came eventually, but it wasn't restful. It never was after these family events. Something always lingered, some residue of the performance I'd had to sit through, the erasure I'd had to accept. And in the morning, I would wake up and do it all again. Because that was the only option I had. That was the only option I'd ever been given. The laughter from that night followed me out of the restaurant and into the next week. It didn't stop. It just changed locations. The dismissal, the casual cruelty, the assumption that I was exactly what they said I was, it all continued in different forms, different contexts, different moments of opportunity for my father and sister to reinforce the narrative they had built around me. By Monday morning, I was back inside a secured room at the Pentagon reviewing a logistics chain tied to a forward unit rotation. The work was routine, the kind of analysis that most people would find tedious but that I found oddly soothing. There was clarity in data, honesty in patterns. The numbers didn't lie, didn't perform, didn't try to be something they weren't. They simply were what they were, and understanding them was a straightforward process of observation and deduction. By Monday afternoon, I was standing in my parents' kitchen holding a printed guest list like it was my primary mission in life. Arthur hadn't asked if I was busy. He never did. He simply assumed that whatever I was doing was less important than whatever he needed, and that I would make myself available accordingly. In his mind, my time had no value because I had no value. It was a simple equation, consistently applied. "Make sure the seating reflects rank," he said, sliding another sheet across the counter. "We're not embarrassing ourselves in front of senior command." I glanced at the list. Half the names on it were people I'd briefed indirectly through classified channels. People who had no idea that the intelligence they received, the recommendations they followed, the decisions they made based on analyses they trusted, all of it had passed through my hands at some point. None of them knew that. And none of them would ever connect the quiet woman standing in her father's kitchen to the analyst whose work had shaped their operations. "Got it," I said. He nodded once and walked out, already on a call. That was the closest thing to a conversation we'd had all week. An instruction delivered. An acknowledgement received. Nothing more, nothing personal. Nothing that might suggest he saw me as anything other than a convenience, a resource to be deployed when needed and ignored when not. By Wednesday, the house looked like a staging area. Catering samples, printed layouts, event planners moving in and out like they were coordinating a military operation. Which, in a way, they were. Every detail had to be perfect. Every arrangement had to reflect the right hierarchy. Every moment had to reinforce the image Arthur wanted to project. Chloe stood in the middle of it all, directing everything like she owned the outcome. She had that particular quality that some people develop when they've spent their entire lives being told they're special, the absolute confidence that every space belongs to them, every decision should run through them, every outcome is theirs to control. "Harper, check the seating again," she said without looking at me. "Declan's team needs to be closer to the front." I adjusted the chart. "They already are," I replied. She finally turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge I existed. "Then make it better," she said. Of course, I made it better, because that's what I did. I optimized systems people didn't even realize were broken. I improved arrangements that seemed fine on the surface. I found the inefficiencies, the small gaps, the almost imperceptible flaws that could be corrected to create something smoother, something more effective. This just happened to be one of the few times it involved table numbers instead of live operations. By Friday, I had memorized the entire guest list. Not because I cared, because I couldn't turn that part of my brain off. Rank, background, deployment history, behavioral patterns. It all just stuck, the way information always stuck when I let myself absorb it. I couldn't look at a name without automatically pulling up associated data, couldn't hear a rank without understanding what it meant in practical terms, couldn't see a seating arrangement without instinctively assessing its efficiency. Chloe walked into the room already dressed like she was about to step onto a stage. Which, in a sense, she was. Everything was a performance. Every moment was an opportunity to reinforce the image, to control the narrative, to present exactly the right version of herself to exactly the right audience. "Did you confirm the final count?" she asked. "Yes, dietary restrictions handled." She nodded, satisfied, then paused like she'd remembered something. "Oh, and make sure you stay out of the way during the main event," she added casually. "We don't need confusion." I looked at her. "I won't be in the way." "I know," she said with a small smile. "Just stay consistent." Consistent. That was a polite way of saying invisible. Stay in character. Stay in your place. Stay exactly what we've decided you are, and don't complicate things by being anything else. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The dynamic was too established, too reinforced over too many years for any response to matter. They had decided who I was, and nothing I said or did was going to change that perception. The only thing that could change it was evidence they couldn't ignore, and that evidence was never going to come from my words. Later that evening, I found myself standing near the back patio where Chloe, Declan, and a group of his SEAL teammates were gathered. I wasn't part of the conversation. I was reviewing final seating adjustments on a tablet, going through motions that didn't require my full attention, occupying space without participating in it. But I could hear everything. Sound carried in that particular way it does when you're not supposed to be listening, when people forget you're there and speak more freely than they otherwise might. You ever get used to it? One of them asked Chloe. Used to what? She replied. The noise, he said, after your first deployment. Chloe shrugged slightly. You don't get used to it, she said. You just stop reacting. A few nods. The quiet acknowledgement of shared experience, the bond of people who had been through something together and didn't need to explain it to each other. Declan leaned against the railing, arms crossed, listening more than talking. I noticed that about him immediately. He wasn't like the others, quieter, more observant. The kind of person who processed before speaking, who gathered information before offering opinions, who understood that the most important thing in any room wasn't what was being said, but what wasn't. Then Chloe laughed lightly and tilted her head in my direction. Harper wouldn't last 5 minutes, she said. The group glanced over. I didn't look up from my tablet. There was no point in engaging. Nothing I could say would change their perception, and defending myself would only make me look defensive, would only reinforce the image she was constructing. She can't handle pressure, Chloe continued. A gunshot would probably send her under a table. Laughter, easy, casual, like it was obvious, like it was true, like she wasn't talking about her own sister, wasn't dismissing someone she'd grown up with, wasn't making judgments about capabilities she knew nothing about. I kept scrolling through the seating chart. Didn't react. Didn't correct her because, again, I couldn't. I couldn't tell them that I'd spent years making decisions under pressure that would have broken most of the people in that conversation. I couldn't explain that the calm they saw, the quiet they interpreted as weakness, was actually control, was actually the result of extensive training in managing stress responses, was actually a skill that had been developed and refined through situations far more intense than anything they'd ever experienced. But for a split second, something shifted. I felt it before I saw it, a pause in the rhythm of the conversation, a subtle change in the quality of attention being paid. I lifted my eyes just enough to catch it. Declan was looking at me, not casually, not dismissively, focused, sharp, the way someone looks when they're trying to solve a problem, when something doesn't add up and they're trying to figure out why. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't laughing. He was studying me, and for a brief moment our eyes met. I didn't look away immediately. I didn't need to. I'd seen that look before. It was the look people got when they noticed something that contradicted their expectations, when they sensed a discrepancy between the story they'd been told and the reality in front of them. Then I dropped my gaze back to the screen. The moment passed. Conversation resumed, but something had changed. A seed had been planted. Someone in that group had started paying attention in a way that wasn't dismissive, wasn't superior, wasn't already convinced they knew what they were seeing. A server stepped onto the patio carrying a tray of drinks. Tight space. Too many people. Bad angle. I noticed it instantly, the way his wrist tilted slightly too far, the imbalance, the inevitable outcome. My brain processed the trajectory before I was consciously aware of it, calculating probabilities and outcomes the way it always did when I let it. I shifted my weight before it even happened. The tray clipped the edge of a chair. Glasses tipped. One of them came straight toward me, and before it could hit, I moved. Not dramatically. Not fast enough for anyone to fully register. Just enough. A clean step back, slight turn of the shoulder, minimal exposure. The wine missed me completely. A few drops hit the floor, that was it. The server froze. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly. "It's fine," I replied. No raised voice, no irritation, just a fact, because it was fine. These things happened, and I had been in far worse situations than a spilled drink. But when I straightened up, Declan was still watching me. Closer now, eyes narrowed slightly. That same look except stronger, more certain. "You moved early," he said. It wasn't a question. I met his gaze again. "Lucky timing," I replied. He didn't buy it. I could tell. People like him didn't believe in luck, not with things like that. Not when the movement was too precise, too controlled, too clearly the result of training rather than chance. One of his teammates laughed it off. "Or she's just got good reflexes," he said. Declan didn't respond. His attention stayed on me for another second longer than necessary. Then he looked away, but not completely. That kind of attention didn't just disappear. It filed things away. It waited. It watched for patterns that might confirm or deny what it suspected. Chloe stepped in smoothly, reclaiming the moment. "See," she said, smiling at her group. "Startle her and she jumps." More laughter. I didn't correct that either. I just turned back to the tablet and adjusted a seating placement that didn't actually need adjusting. It gave me something to do, something controlled, something predictable, unlike people. The rest of the evening moved forward without incident, at least on the surface. Plans finalized, schedules confirmed, details locked in, everything exactly where it needed to be except one thing, Declan. Every time I crossed the room, I could feel it, that awareness, that quiet observation. He wasn't starring, he wasn't obvious, but he was paying attention, and that was new. By the time I left that night, the air felt different. Subtle but real. Chloe still saw me as background noise. Arthur still saw me as a disappointment. Nothing had changed there, but someone else had started asking questions. Not out loud, not yet, but I'd worked around enough intelligence officers to recognize the early signs. Pattern recognition, inconsistency, suspicion. And for the first time in a long time, someone in that house was looking at me like I didn't quite fit the story they'd been told. Like there might be more to the narrative than they'd assumed. Like the quiet woman in the corner might be something other than what everyone insisted she was. I slipped my phone into my pocket and stepped out of the house before anyone could hand me another task. The night air felt quieter than it should have. Not peaceful, just empty. The particular silence of a life that had been hollowed out by years of being overlooked, of being dismissed, of being told in ways both subtle and explicit that you didn't matter. I got into my car, shut the door, and sat there for a second longer than necessary. The engine was still off. The silence pressed in. That moment of stillness between one world and another, between the role I'd just been playing and whatever came next. Then it happened, a vibration, short, long, short, short. I didn't need to check. That pattern wasn't random. I pulled out my secure phone. No caller ID, no message preview, just a coded ping. Morse, priority channel. That meant one thing, something had already gone wrong. Something that needed attention now, not later, not after the engagement party, not after the family obligations were fulfilled. Now. 10 minutes later, I was back inside a windowless room that didn't care about engagement parties or seating charts or family dynamics. The door sealed behind me automatically. I dropped my bag, logged in, and the system came alive. Multiple feeds opened at once. Satellite overlays, intercepted communications, movement logs, too much data for most people, not for me. This was what I was built for. This was the environment where everything made sense, where patterns emerged from chaos, where the skills I'd spent years developing actually had purpose and meaning. I scanned fast, filtered faster. A flag transmission from Kabul caught my attention immediately. Encrypted but sloppy. Whoever sent it didn't expect it to be intercepted. That was their first mistake. I ran it through decryption protocols. Partial success. Enough to get context. Keywords started lining up. Explosive, convoy, timing window. I leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as I pulled in additional data. Thermal imaging, drone sweeps, recent troop rotations. And then there it was. A pattern not obvious, not clean, but real. Someone was setting up an attack, not random, targeted, precise. I cross-referenced the location. My jaw tightened. I knew that base. I didn't need to check twice. Chloe's old unit had rotated through there 3 months ago. Same routes, same routines. And if nothing had changed, the next unit would be walking straight into it. I pulled up the latest deployment roster. Different names, same risk. I didn't hesitate. I flagged the threat and opened a command channel. No room for second guessing. Every second mattered. I adjusted drone coverage first, shifted surveillance patterns to confirm movement on the ground. Then I rerouted an unmanned unit. Closer. Lower altitude. Riskier but necessary. The feed sharpened, and that's when I saw it. Heat signatures where there shouldn't be any. Too random, too still to be civilian. I exhaled slowly, confirmed. I moved to the next step. Evacuation protocol. Not a full withdrawal that would raise alarms and cost time, just enough to redirect. Subtle, controlled. I issued the command. One click. Somewhere across the world, a convoy would change direction without knowing why. That's how it worked. They didn't ask questions. They followed orders. And sometimes that was the only reason they made it home. The room stayed quiet. No applause, no acknowledgement, just systems updating in real time. Threat contained, for now. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. The work was done. The crisis was managed, and no one would ever know it had happened. That was the job. That had always been the job. Then I reached for my personal phone. I shouldn't have, but I did. I scrolled to Arthur's name, paused, then called. He picked up on the second ring. "What is it?" he said, already impatient. No greeting, no pause. Straight to irritation. "I need to ask you something," I said. A beat of silence, then a sigh. "Make it quick." I kept my voice steady. "I came across a report earlier. There might be a security gap in one of the forward bases, Kabul region." That was as far as I could go without crossing lines. Another pause, then a short laugh, not amused, dismissive. "Where did you come across that?" "Just something I read." "That's exactly the problem," he cut in. "You read things, you don't live them." I closed my eyes briefly, kept my tone level. "I'm just saying it might be worth double-checking." "By who?" he snapped. "You." There it was. I should have expected it. Still it landed. "I'm not trying to overstep," I said. "Then don't," he replied immediately. His voice hardened. "Do you have any idea how many armchair analysts think they understand combat because they've seen a few reports?" I didn't answer. He didn't need one. "You sit behind a desk," he continued. "You move papers around and think that gives you insight into real operations." My grip tightened around the phone. Not enough to shake, just enough. "This isn't theory," he went on. "This is real life, real soldiers, real risk." I swallowed the response that wanted to come out, because I couldn't say it. I couldn't tell him that I had just rerouted a drone to confirm a threat his real soldiers hadn't even seen yet. I couldn't tell him I had already moved people out of danger before he even picked up the phone. So I said nothing, and that made it worse. "Don't ever try to lecture me on battlefield decisions," he said sharply. Silence stretched between us, heavy, final. Then he spoke again, colder this time. "Stay in your lane." The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, set it on the desk. The room felt smaller, not physically, just tighter, like the air had shifted. I looked back at the screen, live feed still running. Convoy rerouted, threat bypassed. No casualties, no headlines, no recognition. Exactly how it was supposed to be. I stared at the data for a long moment, then leaned forward and started typing again, because there was always something else. Another signal, another pattern, another decision waiting to be made. That was the job, not being seen, not being understood, and sometimes saving the same people who would never believe you were capable of it. The engagement party was held at a hotel that had clearly been chosen for its ability to make important people feel important. 5-star everything. Polished floors that reflected light in ways designed to impress. Soft lighting that made everyone look better than they probably deserved. Staff moving like they'd rehearsed every step, every gesture, every moment of service. I adjusted my sleeve as the elevator doors opened into the lobby and stepped into a world that had nothing to do with reality. This was theater. This was performance. This was the kind of event where people came to see and be seen, to reinforce hierarchies and establish connections, and perform the particular version of success they wanted the world to believe in. And everywhere I looked, uniforms, pressed, decorated, perfect, medals lined up like proof of worth, each one a story or at least a claim to a story. Some of them earned, some of them exaggerated, all of them displayed with the careful precision of people who understood how much appearance mattered in this world. I walked past them quietly, heels soft against the marble. I already knew where I belonged in this room. Not at the center, never at the center. The outskirts, the corners, the places where people forgot to look, where attention didn't reach, where I could exist without interfering with the narratives being constructed. The ballroom doors were already open. Inside, the place was packed. Senior officers, their families, people who had spent their lives building reputations that could fill a room like this. The particular atmosphere of contained energy that came from too many ambitious people in too small a space, all of them aware of each other, all of them calculating, all of them performing. Arthur stood near the front, exactly where he wanted to be. Visible, respected, admired, the center of attention in a room full of people who had learned to pay attention to the right people. He wore his importance like a second skin, comfortable and confident and completely unself-conscious about the space he occupied. Chloe was beside him. Of course, tonight wasn't just her engagement party. It was a showcase, a celebration of everything she was and everything she was going to be. Every detail designed to reinforce her position, her status, her importance. Declan stood next to her, composed, controlled, scanning the room in a way that told me he never fully relaxed in crowded spaces. He noticed me when I walked in, not openly, just a shift in his posture, a quick glance, then back to neutral. I didn't react. I moved toward the seating area instead, checking the layout without making it obvious. Everything was exactly where I had placed it. Every name, every position, every calculated detail, except mine. I found it near the edge of the room, close to the service entrance. A table tucked just far enough away that no one important would accidentally end up there. I stared at the name card for a second, then pulled out the chair and sat down. Of course, consistent. From where I was sitting, I could see everything, just not be part of it. Servers moved in and out behind me. Doors swung open and closed quietly. The faint sound of kitchen noise slipped in every time someone passed through. I picked up a glass of water and took a small sip. Cold, clean, predictable. Across the room, the event started to build. Lights dimmed slightly. Music softened. Arthur stepped forward. He didn't need a microphone to command attention, but he had one anyway. He tapped it once, unnecessary but effective. The room quieted. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, voice steady and practiced. I leaned back slightly in my chair. I'd heard versions of this speech before. Different audience, same message. "Tonight isn't just about celebration," he continued. "It's about legacy." There it was. He turned slightly toward Chloe and Declan. "My daughter," he said, pride clear in every word, "has dedicated her life to service, to sacrifice, to something bigger than herself." A pause, applause followed. Chloe lowered her gaze just enough to seem modest. Declan remained still, respectful but not performing. Arthur continued. "And Declan," he added, "a man who understands exactly what that kind of commitment means." More applause. Arthur smiled, soaking it in. Then he raised his glass slightly. "They represent the best of what this family stands for," he said. "Strength, discipline, honor." The room responded exactly how it was supposed to. Approving nods, quiet agreement, glasses lifting. I watched it all from the corner, detached, not emotionally, just accurately, because I knew what wasn't being said. I knew what never would be. Dinner was served. Conversation spread across the room in controlled waves. I stayed where I was. No one approached my table. That wasn't an accident. That was design. I took another sip of water and kept my posture relaxed. No tension. No visible reaction. Just observation. Across the room, Chloe leaned in toward a group of guests, smiling, engaged, exactly who they expected her to be. Arthur moved between tables, shaking hands, reinforcing his position in every interaction. Declan spoke less than the others, but he watched more. At one point, his eyes drifted in my direction again. Brief, measured, then gone, but not forgotten. Eventually, Arthur returned to the front. Second speech. This one looser, less structured, more alcohol involved. That's when things got honest, or at least closer to it. He raised his glass again, slightly higher this time. "You know," he said, voice carrying just a bit too far, "it's not every day you get to see your child become exactly what you hope they would be." The room leaned in. I didn't move. He turned toward Chloe again. "When she was younger," he continued, "I always knew she had it in her." A soft laugh. Even when things got hard, she never backed down. More nods, more approval. Then he shifted just slightly, enough to change direction. "I guess not everyone turns out that way," he added. There it was, subtle at first, then not at all. He looked across the room, not directly at me, but close enough. "Some people," he went on, "choose the safe path." A few guests chuckled lightly, encouraging him. He took another sip of his drink. "In this family," he said, "we believe in earning your place, in proving your worth." My hand rested lightly against the side of my glass, still controlled. Across the room, a few heads turned, following the direction of his words. "And while my youngest daughter has been out there risking her life," he continued. Voice steady, deliberate, "my other daughter." A pause, not for effect, for choice. He made it anyway. "Has been enjoying the comfort of air-conditioned offices." Laughter, not loud, but enough to carry, enough to land. I didn't move, didn't look up, didn't react, because reacting would have given it weight, and I wasn't going to give him that. Arthur smiled slightly, encouraged. "Sometimes I wonder," he added, "if the warrior blood in this family just skipped one." More laughter this time, less restrained, more confident, because now they knew it was acceptable. They had permission to find it funny. I tightened my grip on the glass just enough to feel it, then relaxed it. Slow, controlled. Across the room, Chloe didn't stop him, didn't interrupt, didn't even look uncomfortable. She just stood there, letting it happen, because it benefited her. Declan didn't laugh, I noticed that. He didn't speak either, just watched, again, always watching. The sound of glasses clinking filled the room as Arthur lifted his own once more. "To those who serve for real," he said. The room echoed him. "To those who serve." I didn't raise mine. I didn't need to, because I knew something they didn't. I knew exactly how many people in that room were alive because of decisions made far away from any battlefield. Decisions made in rooms like the one I worked in. Decisions that didn't come with medals or speeches or applause. I rested my hand casually against my coat, fingers brushing lightly against the secure device hidden inside, still active, still connected, even here, even now, because the job didn't pause for celebrations, and it definitely didn't care about recognition. Arthur finished his speech. Applause filled the room. People stood, celebrated, moved on like nothing had just happened. I stayed seated, calm, silent, exactly where they expected me to be, and exactly where they thought I belonged. I set my glass down just as the laughter started to fade, and something else replaced it. A shift, subtle, but noticeable if you knew what to listen for. The doors near the front opened again. A group of men stepped inside. Their posture gave them away before anything else did. Not active duty, not tonight, but they carried themselves like they hadn't forgotten a single thing. Declan noticed them immediately. This time he didn't hide it. He straightened slightly, attention locking in as they approached. "Didn't think you'd make it," he said, stepping forward. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a faded scar along his jaw, grinned, and pulled him into a quick handshake that turned into a half embrace. "Wouldn't miss this. Not for you." They spoke like men who had seen the same bad night and made it out together. That kind of bond didn't need explanation. Chloe stepped in smoothly, smile already in place. "I've heard a lot about you guys," she said. The group acknowledged her politely, respectful, measured, not impressed. They weren't here for her. The conversation pulled a small crowd. People always leaned toward stories like that. War stories cleaned up just enough to be told in a room like this. I stayed where I was, close enough to hear, far enough to be ignored, exactly where I needed to be. The man with the scar leaned against the edge of a table, glancing around once before speaking. "You remember Kabul," he said to Declan. Declan gave a short nod. "I remember." A few of the others exchanged looks, the kind that said they all remembered the same moment. "Yeah," the man said. "That night almost wiped us out." The room quieted just a little, not enough to draw attention, just enough to listen. "We were pinned down," another one added. "No clear exit, comms were barely holding." I didn't move, didn't react, but every detail lined up instantly in my head. Grid coordinates, timestamps, signal interference patterns. I knew exactly which night they were talking about, because I had been there, not physically, but closer than they would ever understand. "There was no way out," the first man continued. "Not until someone stepped in." A pause, he exhaled slightly. Didn't even know who it was at the time. Declan's expression shifted, barely, but I saw it, recognition. "They called it an overcomms," he said quietly. "New route, precise, no hesitation." "Yeah," the man nodded, "and whoever it was, they saw things we didn't." Another voice joined in. "Drone cleared the path before we even got there, like it was already planned." It wasn't luck. No, it wasn't. I took a slow sip of water, kept my eyes on the table, let them talk, because this part didn't belong to me. It never did. Chloe stepped forward again. Perfect timing, always. "That sounds like the operation my unit supported," she said, voice calm, confident. The group turned toward her. She held their attention easily. "We were running Overwatch in that region," she added, "coordinating with multiple teams." It wasn't a lie, not exactly, just incomplete. "It was chaotic," she continued, "but we managed to stabilize the situation." Managed. I kept my expression neutral. Across the room, Arthur was watching with clear approval. Of course he was. This was exactly what he wanted. The narrative stayed intact. The hero stayed visible. The details stayed clean. Declan didn't move, didn't agree, didn't interrupt, at least not immediately. He just listened, processing, comparing. And then something clicked. I saw it in his posture before he spoke. A shift forward, slight, intentional. "That's not how I remember it," he said. The conversation paused. Chloe turned toward him, still smiling. "Memory gets messy in those situations," she replied lightly. "Not that messy," Declan said. His tone didn't change, still calm, still controlled, but sharper now. He looked at the group, then back at Chloe. "Whoever gave that route," he continued, "they didn't just stabilize anything." Silence tightened around the table. "They calculated it," he said, "down to the second." No one spoke. "They adjusted for movement we hadn't even reported yet." That got attention, real attention, because that detail didn't belong in a public story. Chloe's smile held, but thinner now. "And you know that because?" she asked. Declan didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. His eyes moved slowly across the room, past the center, past the crowd, until they landed on me. In the corner, exactly where I'd been all night. He held my gaze longer this time. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just focus. And then he spoke, not to Chloe, not to the group, to me. "What were the extraction coordinates that night?" he asked. The room didn't go completely silent, but close enough for people nearby to notice the shift, enough for it to matter. I didn't look up immediately. I picked up my glass instead, took a small sip, set it back down, then raised my eyes to meet his. Calm, neutral, controlled. There were 100 ways to answer that question, most of them safe, most of them forgettable. I didn't choose those. Depends which route you trusted, I said. His expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened. I continued. Primary path was compromised before you even moved. If you followed it, you wouldn't have made it past the second turn. A pause. No one else spoke. Secondary route only worked, I said, because someone adjusted for the delay in your rear unit. That detail landed hard, because it wasn't public. It wasn't documented anywhere accessible. It was one of those small, critical pieces of information that only existed in real time or in memory. Declan's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, recognition. Rear unit was 30 seconds behind, he said. 28, I replied. Quiet, precise, final. The space between us shifted. He held my gaze for another second, then leaned back slightly. Not relaxed, just recalibrating. The conversation didn't resume right away, because people didn't understand what they had just heard, but they felt it. That subtle sense that something didn't fit the story they thought they knew. Chloe didn't speak. Arthur didn't move. And for the first time that night, I wasn't invisible anymore. Not completely, just enough to be noticed, and just enough to make someone start asking the right questions. I held his gaze for one more second, then looked away just as the room tried to breathe again. No one picked the conversation back up. They couldn't, because something had shifted, and they didn't have a name for it yet. That's when the first phone vibrated. Not casually, not like a message, sharp, urgent, repeated. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the sound spread across the room like a signal no one could ignore. Different devices. Same pattern. Every senior officer in that ballroom reached for their phone at the same time. That wasn't coincidence. That was protocol. I didn't move. I didn't need to check mine. I already knew what kind of alert triggered that kind of response. Something big. Something active. Arthur frowned, pulling his phone out and scanning the screen. His posture changed immediately, not confident anymore, focused, tense. What is this? Someone near him asked. No idea, Arthur replied, but his tone said otherwise. Around the room, voices dropped. Fragments of information started surfacing. System breach. Multiple access points. Is this internal? No, it's external. The air tightened fast. Declan stepped away from the group, already moving into a more controlled position. Scanning exits, assessing space without drawing attention to it. Chloe stood still for a moment, watching Arthur, waiting for direction. That was the problem. She needed direction, and Arthur didn't have it, not this time. This doesn't make sense, he muttered, scrolling through whatever limited information he had access to. There's no scheduled, he stopped mid-sentence. Because there wouldn't be. Attacks didn't schedule themselves. I reached into my coat slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise. My fingers closed around the device before it even activated. A second later, it rang. Not like the others, not like anything in that room. A clean, sharp tone, recognizable, specific, Tier 1 secure line, the kind you didn't ignore, the kind that didn't call unless it mattered. Every intelligence officer in that room turned. Instinct, training, recognition. They knew that sound. They just didn't expect it to come from me. Arthur's head snapped in my direction. Confusion hit first, then disbelief, then anger. What are you doing? He demanded, already moving toward me. I didn't answer. I pulled the device out, glanced at the screen. Priority override, direct channel, no hesitation. I answered. Harper. That's all I said, because that's all I needed to say. Arthur reached me in 2 steps. His hand shot out, grabbing for the phone. Have you lost your mind? He snapped. Do you have any idea what's happening right now? I shifted slightly, minimal movement, just enough. His hand missed. Clean, controlled. Not obvious to most people, but not to everyone. Declan saw it. I could feel it without looking. Arthur didn't care. He tried again, angrier this time. "Give me that," he ordered. "You don't interfere in an active security situation." I stood up slowly, deliberately, and for the first time that night, I didn't let him control the space. I moved his hand aside, not aggressively, just enough force to make a point. Then I looked at him directly, no hesitation, no softness. "Step back, Colonel," I said. His expression froze, not because of the words, because of the tone. Flat, certain, unfamiliar. "You don't have the clearance to be part of this call." Silence hit harder than anything he'd said all night. Arthur stared at me like he'd never seen me before, like something didn't line up, like the version of me he had built in his head just broke in real time. "What are you talking about?" he said, voice lower now but sharper. "This is a military." I turned away from him completely, dismissed him, because I didn't have time. "Repeat the breach vector," I said into the phone, already moving a few steps away from the table. The voice on the other end responded immediately. Fast, technical, controlled urgency. "Multiple entry points. Eastern network clusters compromised. We're seeing data extraction attempts across 3 secured layers." I walked toward a quieter corner of the room, not hiding, just isolating. "How deep?" I asked. "Level 4 confirmed. Attempting escalation." I processed that instantly. Level 4 meant they were close, too close. Containment status. Unstable. Of course it was. I glanced around the room once. People were watching now, not casually, not dismissively, trying to understand what they were looking at. Too late for that. "Shut down external access points," I said. "Redirect internal traffic through secondary channels. Isolate compromised nodes." "Yes, ma'am." No hesitation, no question, execution, that's how this worked. Behind me, I could hear Arthur still talking, still trying to regain control. "This is unacceptable," he said to someone nearby. "She's interfering with—" He stopped, because no one was listening to him anymore. Not fully. Not the way they had before, because now they were watching me. "Patch me into live feed," I said. A brief delay. Then data started coming through. Even without a screen, I could follow it. Pattern recognition, signal flow. They were probing, testing weaknesses, looking for access points they shouldn't even know existed. Which meant one thing: this wasn't random. This was informed. "Whoever's doing this knows the structure," I said. "Yes, ma'am," the voice confirmed. "We're tracing, but—" "You won't find them fast enough," I cut in. I adjusted my position slightly, leaning against the edge of a table. Stable, focused. "Cut the system at the root," I said. A pause. That wasn't a small order. "That will shut down." "I know what it will shut down," I said. "Do it." Another pause, shorter this time, because they recognized the voice, the authority. "Executing." The room stayed frozen around me. No one interrupted. No one stepped in, because they didn't understand what they were watching, but they knew it mattered. Declan stood a few feet away now, closer than before, not interfering, just observing. Arthur didn't move, didn't speak, because for the first time he didn't know what to say. "Containment holding," the voice reported. "Good, not over, but stable. Keep monitoring. I want real-time updates on any secondary attempts." "Yes, ma'am." The line stayed open. That meant it wasn't finished. It never was. I lowered the phone slightly. Didn't turn around immediately. Didn't need to, because I could feel it. The shift, the attention, the questions building in that room. And right behind me, Arthur's voice, quieter now, uncertain. "What are you?" I didn't answer, because he wasn't asking the right question, and for the first time in his life, he knew it. I kept the line open, listening to the steady stream of updates as the system stabilized just enough to keep breathing. Then the doors slammed open. Not politely, not like guests arriving late. Forced, heavy wood hitting the wall with a sound that cut through the room like a command. Every head turned. Every conversation died instantly. You didn't need an announcement when that kind of presence walked in. You felt it. A 4-star general didn't enter quietly. Thomas Vance stepped into the ballroom like he had somewhere else to be and no time to waste here. 2 armed security officers followed him in, scanning the room in synchronized motion. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just control. The entire room stood. Instinct, training, respect. Even the people who didn't know him stood anyway, because they recognized rank when they saw it. Arthur moved first. Of course he did. He straightened his jacket, his posture snapping back into place like this was his moment again. Opportunity, redemption. He walked forward quickly, Chloe right beside him. Both of them already shifting into their public roles. Arthur's face lit up with something I hadn't seen all night. Pride, expectation. "General Vance," he called out, voice carrying with confidence he had just regained. "It's an honor to have you here." Vance didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge him, didn't even look at him. He walked straight past, like Arthur wasn't there, like he hadn't spoken at all. The smile on my father's face didn't disappear immediately. It stalled, hung there, waiting for recognition that never came. Chloe stopped too, her expression tightening just slightly as she realized something was off. Vance didn't stop at the center of the room. He didn't turn toward the stage. He didn't engage with any of the senior officers who had just stood up for him. He kept walking, direct, focused, purposeful. Toward me. I didn't move. I didn't step forward. I didn't adjust my posture. I just stood where I was, the secure phone still in my hand, the call still active. Because I already knew. The moment the doors opened, I knew this wasn't about them. The room stayed silent as he crossed it. Every step recalibrated the atmosphere. Not tense, not chaotic, just clear, like something important was about to be said, and everyone understood they weren't the ones it was meant for. Arthur turned slowly, confusion spreading across his face, then disbelief, because now he saw where Vance was going. Chloe followed his gaze, so did everyone else. And for the first time that night, every eye in that room landed on me at the same time. Vance stopped a few feet in front of me, close enough to speak without raising his voice, but he didn't lower it. He reached up, removed his glasses, and looked at me directly. No hesitation, no doubt, just confirmation. "Director," he said. The word landed harder than anything else that had happened that night. Not loud, but absolute. He held out a secured tablet, encrypted, active, urgent. "We need you now," he continued. "The intelligence network is destabilizing." No explanation, no context, because none was needed. I took the tablet without hesitation. My focus shifted instantly. Screen active, data already loading, multiple breach points, wider than the initial report, more aggressive. They weren't just probing anymore, they were pushing. "Who authorized the isolation protocol?" he asked. "I did," I replied, already scanning the data. A brief nod, approval, not surprise. "Good," he said, "it bought us time." Behind him, the room didn't move, didn't breathe, because no one understood what they had just heard, except a few, and those few weren't saying anything. Arthur stepped forward again, slower this time, careful, like he wasn't sure where the line was anymore. "General," he said, voice tight, controlled, "I believe there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Vance didn't turn fully, just enough. A glance, cold, measured. "There isn't," he said. 2 words, that was all it took. Arthur stopped completely, because that wasn't how conversations with him were supposed to go. Not for someone like Arthur, not in a room like this. Chloe looked between us, between me and the general, trying to connect something that didn't make sense. "You're looking for someone else," she said carefully. "My sister, she's not." Vance turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her, then dismissed it immediately. "I know exactly who I'm looking for," he said. No anger, no emphasis, just fact. That made it worse. I kept reading, filtering, prioritizing. They're testing fallback systems now, I said, more to myself than anyone else. They've already accessed partial archives, Vance replied. We need containment before escalation. I nodded once, already moving through options. Shut down tertiary nodes, I said. Force them into a controlled pathway. They'll know we're doing it. They already know we're here, I replied. This just limits what they can take. A pause, then do it. Behind us, the room still hadn't recovered. Arthur stood frozen, not speaking, not moving, because everything he thought he understood was gone. Chloe's expression cracked, not dramatically, just enough to show that something inside her had shifted, that confidence, that certainty, it wasn't holding anymore. Declan didn't move, didn't speak, but his eyes were locked on me, not confused, not surprised, just confirmed, like he had already started putting it together before anyone else had the chance. I stepped slightly to the side, giving myself more space to work. Tablet in one hand, phone still active in the other. Patch this into central command, I said into the line. Yes, ma'am. Always the same response. Immediate, clear, no hesitation, because this wasn't a discussion. This was execution. Arthur finally found his voice again, quieter, unsteady. Director, he repeated, like the word didn't belong in the same room as me, like it didn't fit. He looked at me like he was trying to rewrite everything he thought he knew in real time, and failing, because there wasn't enough time. There never is. Vance turned slightly, scanning the room once, not impressed, not concerned, just assessing. Then he looked back at me. Can you hold the line? He asked. Not a challenge, a confirmation. Yes, I said, because there was no other answer. He nodded once, that was enough. And just like that, the story they had been telling themselves all night stopped making sense. Not gradually, not softly. It broke completely, because the version of me they understood never existed in the first place. I kept my eyes on the tablet as the room went completely still behind me. Not quiet, still. The kind of silence that doesn't come from calm. It comes from people realizing they've missed something important. Data streamed across the screen in clean lines. Breach attempts were narrowing. Containment was holding, but barely. Whoever was behind this was adjusting in real time. So was I. Shift the firewall 2 degrees off the predicted pattern, I said into the phone. Make it look unstable. Copy that. They'll push harder if they think it's breaking. Yes, ma'am. I didn't look up, because I didn't need to. I could feel every set of eyes in that room. And right behind me, Arthur stepped forward. Slow, careful, like approaching something he didn't understand. General, I think there's been a mistake, he said. His voice wasn't confident anymore. It wasn't even controlled. It was searching, trying to find ground that wasn't there. Vance didn't respond, not immediately. Arthur kept going. She's not, he hesitated, then forced the words out. She's just a desk worker, administrative, a secretary. The word hung in the air longer than it should have, because this time it didn't land the way he expected. No laughter, no agreement, no support. Just silence. I didn't turn around. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to, because this part was never mine to say. Vance moved fast, controlled, but sharp enough to cut through the room. He turned fully toward Arthur, and this time there was no patience in his expression. A secretary, he repeated. His voice didn't rise much, but it didn't need to. It carried, heavy, exact. Arthur opened his mouth, closed it, didn't answer, because there wasn't a version of that sentence that still made sense anymore. Vance stepped closer, not aggressively, just enough to make the distance matter. The person you're calling a secretary, he said, each word deliberate, is the reason multiple units are still operational today. The room didn't move, didn't breathe. Vance didn't stop. She is the one who has been coordinating black-level intelligence operations for the past 2 years. That got attention, real attention, the kind that shifts posture, the kind that resets how people stand. Arthur's face changed, color draining, eyes tightening, trying to process something that refused to fit. Vance's voice hardened. "You want a title," he said. "Fine." A brief pause. "Then she's the one they call the Ghost of Kabul." That name didn't echo. It settled deep. Because the people in that room, some of them knew it. Some of them had heard it in briefings, in reports that didn't go into detail, in conversations that stopped short of explanation. A name without a face. Until now. Chloe took a step back, small, uncontrolled, like her body reacted before her mind could catch up. "No," she said quietly, not denial, refusal, because if that was true, then everything else wasn't. Vance didn't look at her. He kept his focus on Arthur. "The useless job you mocked," he continued, "is what allowed your daughter's unit to survive an ambush 3 months ago. That hit harder than anything else, because this time it was personal." Arthur's eyes flicked toward Chloe, then back, then to me, like he was trying to find the version of reality that made more sense. He didn't find it, because it didn't exist. "She rerouted the strike," Vance said. "She cleared the path. She made the call that kept them alive." I didn't react, didn't look up, didn't acknowledge it, because this wasn't about credit. It never was. Chloe shook her head slightly, trying to reject it, trying to hold on to something that was already gone. "That's not possible," she said. "We had command." "You had orders," Vance cut in, clean, final. Silence, heavy, unavoidable. And those orders came from her. No room left for interpretation. I adjusted the tablet slightly, tracking the last active breach attempt as it failed against the new containment layer. "They're pulling back," I said into the phone. "Maintain pressure. Don't give them a clean exit." "Yes, ma'am." I ended the call, lowered the phone, and finally turned around. Not slowly, not dramatically, just enough to face the room. Arthur looked at me like he didn't recognize me, like I was someone else standing in my place. "Harper," he said. My name sounded unfamiliar in his voice, like he hadn't used it properly before. Chloe didn't speak, didn't move. Her posture had collapsed just slightly, enough to show the crack. Declan stood still, but his expression had changed. Not questioning anymore, not analyzing, just understanding. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because everything that mattered had already been said. Not by me, by someone they couldn't dismiss. That's the difference. People don't question the truth when it comes from authority. They only question it when it comes from someone they've decided not to respect. Arthur tried again, voice quieter now, uncertain. You never said anything," he managed. I held his gaze, calm, steady. "No," I said, because that part was true. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I didn't fill the silence for him, because he didn't deserve that. Vance stepped back slightly, giving me space, not out of courtesy, out of recognition. The room stayed frozen. No one moved, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to say that would fix what had just broken. Not tonight, not ever. Chloe's eyes dropped to the medals on her uniform, just for a second, but it was enough, because now she knew not where they came from, but what they cost, and who paid it. I shifted my weight slightly, the tablet still in my hand. Work wasn't done. It never is. And neither was this moment. But one thing had already changed permanently. They didn't see me as invisible anymore. They saw me clearly for the first time. And it wasn't something they could ignore. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence do what it needed to do. No one rushed to fix it. No one tried to laugh it off. Because there are moments when people understand instinctively that anything they say will only make it worse. Arthur didn't look like the same man anymore. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. All that was left was someone trying to catch up to a reality he had spent years ignoring. "Harper," he said again, quieter this time, like he wasn't sure he had the right to say my name. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because this wasn't a conversation. This was consequence. A chair shifted somewhere behind him. Small sound. but it broke the stillness just enough. Declan stepped forward, not quickly, not dramatically, measured, controlled, the same way he had been all night. But this time, there was no hesitation. He stopped a few feet in front of me, straightened his posture, and then he raised his hand. Clean, precise, perfect. A full military salute. Not casual, not symbolic, formal, intentional, the kind of salute you don't give lightly, the kind you earn. The room didn't react right away, because they didn't understand what they were seeing. But the people who did felt it immediately. That wasn't respect for a story. That was recognition, for authority, for action, for decisions made under pressure that most people in that room would never survive. I held his gaze, then returned the salute, just as precise, just as controlled, nothing more, nothing less. That was enough. Declan lowered his hand, stepped back, and didn't say a word, because there was nothing he could say that would add to what he had just done. Behind him, Chloe broke. Not loudly at first, just a sharp inhale, like something inside her finally gave way. She took a step back, then another. Her composure collapsed in real time. Tears came fast, uncontrolled, not for attention, not for sympathy, because she couldn't hold it anymore. This doesn't make sense, she said, shaking her head. You didn't. She couldn't finish the sentence, because there wasn't one that worked. Her eyes moved over me, like she was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me, and realizing how much she had missed, or ignored. Same difference. Arthur tried again. He always did, even when there was nothing left to fix. I didn't know, he said. The words sounded weak, because they were. I would have. He stopped, because there was no version of that sentence that held up. I watched him quietly, let him struggle with it, let him sit in it, because this wasn't about what he would have done. It was about what he did, repeatedly, consistently, over time. You never told me, he added, almost like that would help. It didn't. I tilted my head slightly, studied him for a second, then answered. No, I said, calm, flat, true. Because I hadn't. But that wasn't the point. He took a step closer, careful, like approaching something fragile or dangerous. I need to understand, he said. Why wouldn't you say something? There it was, the question he should have asked years ago, just not like this, not now, not after everything. I looked at him, really looked this time, not as my father, not as anything personal, just a man who had made a series of choices and was now facing the result. I didn't need you to understand, I said. My voice didn't rise, didn't shift, it didn't have to. I needed you to listen. That landed harder than anything else I could have said, because he knew. He knew exactly how many times he hadn't. Chloe wiped at her face, but it didn't help. You let me believe, she started. I didn't let her finish. I didn't let you believe anything, I said, not sharp, not aggressive, just clear. You decided what I was without asking. She froze, because that was true, and truth doesn't give you anywhere to go. Arthur shook his head slightly, still trying to find something to hold on to. Harper, please, he said. That word didn't fit him, not in this context, not after everything, but he used it anyway. Just talk to me. I held his gaze, steady, unmoved. Then I spoke. I don't work in the dark waiting for approval, I said, every word controlled, exact. I do it because it's the job. No emotion, no performance, just fact. You're proud of visible medals, I continued. Things people can see, things they can celebrate. I let that sit for half a second, then finished it. I'm proud of keeping people alive long enough to wear them. Silence complete, because there was nothing left to argue with, nothing left to correct, nothing left to misunderstand. Arthur's mouth opened slightly, closed again. No words came out, because there weren't any that would fix this. Chloe didn't speak, didn't move. She just stood there, facing something she couldn't undo. Declan stayed where he was, still respectful, aware, but not involved, because this part didn't belong to him. I shifted the tablet in my hand, checked the screen briefly. Systems were stabilizing, not finished, but controlled. Good enough for now. I stepped past Arthur, not brushing against him, not acknowledging him, just moving forward. Because I had somewhere else to be, something else to do. Vance was already heading toward the exit. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew I'd follow. I always did. "Harper," Arthur said one last time. Desperate now, not authoritative, not confident, just late. I didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't slow down. Because some moments don't get a second version. Some words don't get to land twice. And some apologies don't matter when they come after the damage is already done. I walked out of the ballroom without looking back. The noise didn't return behind me. The room stayed quiet, because they didn't know how to recover from something like that. And they shouldn't, not immediately, not easily. That's the point. I stepped into the hallway, the door closing behind me with a soft final sound. The air felt different out here. Clear, focused, real. Vance handed me an updated feed, without breaking stride. "Next phase is already moving," he said. "I know," I replied. We kept walking side by side. No hesitation, no pause, because whatever happened in that room was already over. The work continued. It always did. And for the first time in years, I walked into that work with something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Not vindication, not revenge, not the satisfaction of proving them wrong. Just clarity. The understanding that some truths don't need to be spoken. They just need the right moment to reveal themselves. And when they do, no amount of denial can protect the people who spent years refusing to see what was right in front of them. If you've ever been the most capable person in the room and still been treated like you don't belong there, you already understand what this story was really about. Not revenge, not validation, but the moment when silence stops being a shelter and starts being a choice. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to people who underestimated you isn't proving them wrong. It's letting them discover the truth on their own, in front of everyone who mattered, without a single word of explanation from you. Because that kind of realization doesn't fade. It doesn't get explained away. It just sits there, permanent and undeniable for the rest of their lives. They'll never forget who I was. And more importantly, they'll never forget what they did to someone they thought didn't matter. The work continues. The silence ends. And the truth, eventually, always finds its way to the surface. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength and the moments when invisible power finally becomes undeniable. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in that room? Would you have stayed silent as long as Harper did, or would you have broken their illusion years ago? The conversation continues below. I'll see you in the next one.